This video will discuss about data types, variables, and variable declaration.
Reserved words. So these are reserved words of Java. We have abstract down to this, meaning if you cannot use this one as your variable name or as your identifier. The name of the variable is what we called it as identifier. And all these words are do have series of instruction that's built in with it depending on what superclass do they part of. That's why you cannot make use of this one, of all these words into identifier. Data types. So with data types, there are primitive data types part of, or data types of Java programming. What are these data types? So we have logical. Logical are Boolean, defined as Boolean. So you will make use of the Boolean word that can produce either true or false. You have integral that are byte, short, int, and long. So these are the keywords that you're going to use right before the identifier to create a variable declaration, int and long. And then floating point, we have double and float. And last one is textual, we have character. And there is also a string type. So primitive type and string type. So with textual, that can either be char or character, and string. String is a class, that's why you will observe it defined as or used as with capital letter S. So with character or char, represent a 16-bit Unicode character, must have its literal or constant enclosed in a single quote, this one. So every time you use character, char, data type, you're going to enclose it with a single quote. String is a class. It is a class, not a primitive data type. String constant should be enclosed in double quotes. That's we have here the double quotes. So if you would initialize a variable declaration, you should enclose it with a double quote if the variable declaration is identified as a string. So again, we have primitive types and string. And we also have textual, which is the character. So those are then our data types. Further discussion of data types, we have here data types deeper definition or deeper understanding of data types. So data types length and range. So we have learned a while ago the different primitive data types wherein we know that it can be there are floating point, you have boolean, there is integral and textual. Now here we have the different primitive data types in their length and range. So first is we have byte. It's an 8 bits, and to compute the range, that would be negative 2 to the power of 7 to 2 to the power of 7 minus 1. And to compute that, it will give us 128 to 127, because 128 minus 1 because of the 1 minus here, and that will just give us 127. So that's the range of byte. For short, we have 16 bits. So this is how you will compute now the range of short. And for integer, that's 32 bits. So 2 to the power of 31 to 2 to the power of 31 minus 1. So that's also how you will going to compute now the range of int. As well as for long, which is 64 bits, float of 32 bits, double of 64 bits, character of 16 bits, 0 to 2 to the power of 16 minus 1, which defines then all the characters and symbols of your alphabets. And then lastly, we have Boolean, which is of course just one bit because it will only accept either true or false. So those are then the deeper definition of data types in terms of length and range. We have now literals or constants. So program elements used in an invariant manner are called literals or constants. Literals can be numbers, characters, or strings. So meaning if you would have a part of your program that only have one value from the start of the program up to the end of its part, then that is considered, or that kind of declaration is classified as literals or constants. That if you have many of it. Now, literals can be numbers, characters, or strings. Numeric literals include integers, floating point, numbers, and Boolean. We have learned a while ago the different primitive data type as well as their length and range, and that is the same application or the same usage when it comes to literals and constants. Whatever property of that integer, floating point, numbers, Boolean would still be the same property once you create a declaration that is classified as literals or constants. Boolean are considered numeric because of the C influence of Java. In C, the Boolean values for true and false are represented by 1 and 0. And 1 and 0 are still considered numeric or number. That's why we define booleans as numeric literals. Character literals are always referred to a single Unicode character. So you have strings, which contains multiple characters, are still considered literals even though they are implemented in Java as objects. So still, once we have that kind of declaration that it's string, then therefore, and it is fixed from the start of the program up to the end of the program, or from the start of your code up to the end of your code, then that kind of declaration still considered as literals or constant. So we have here an example. We have an element x. X is our variable name or the identifier, and the data type is int, and the value is 56. So whenever there is x in a series of your code, the value of x is 56. Same principle applied to reigning, which to have a value of 1, and mid initial, which to have a value of b. That is a literals a literal that is defined as character. So that is then literals and constants. Variable declaration. With variable declaration, the reason why we discuss about reserved words, the data types, and the range and the length of each data types, because in variable declaration, it is the main components, or we should say it as the ingredients in variable declaration, or the syntax for the variable declaration are those things that we discussed earlier on. Wherein, when you say variable declaration, it would consist of data type based on the data type of the data, and then the variable name that will follow the rules in creating identifier, and the initial value. So in Java, it's always mandatory that when you create a variable, there should always be an initial value. If you don't want to have a specific value, then you can put now 0 as your initial value of your variable. So here we have 20 as our initial value of age integer variable, wherein when you say variable, you create a temporary storage or a in your memory, and we have here reserved memory for variable, wherein we put now 20 to that of our reserved memory that is placed then or stored in your RAM. However, if you would put value now, if you will call a syntax calling an input calling an input to age, then that 20 will be changed or will be overlapped. So that is then variable declaration. So I already created few lines of code in Java using Eclipse that performs now those different primitive data types. So I will just add up byte and long. So we already discussed the different range of byte, long, int, float, double, character, char, and boolean. So for byte, the highest number that it can accept is up to 127. So if I would declare it as 190, it already calls now an error because the highest value that it can cater is up to 127 only. So there you have, if I would put it now 128, so it already calls now an error. How did I know that? Because it marks now red, so that means it's already wrong. So 127 is the highest value that the byte can accept. Now here, long and byte as well as int to have similar appearance. But how would you designate, how would you make a remark, or how would you mark now your program that this kind of variable is long? So let's have, for example, I will have, this is the value that I will put now. Okay, so let us see. So no error so far, because it's still part, or it's still, yes, it's still what, okay, not used. That's why the yellow marks is appearing. So it does not call now an error. But for you to put a distinction that it's a long and it's not an integer, then you will now put a literals in the end of the value, like this one, F for float and D for double, to differentiate the declaration that it's a double and it's not a float, or it's a long and it's not an integer. So let's say, for example, the highest value that, and how would you do now, as how would you now organize your output now in Java? So we can put some underscore to mark now the value, okay, that the number that we initialize. So if I would add up here another value, let's see, so it's still part because it's still a million, but if we will reach to billion, okay, but if I would have, all right, it's already, it calls already now an error. So the highest value that it can accept is up to 1 billion. So but if, all right, so that's long. Now let's say, for example, if I would now have, or what if I would be putting here 3, but I would like to place L, so it's now accepts because long can still 3 billion can still now cater, or can still be covered under that of integer. And to create now a difference that this is a long, not an integer, then we put now a character L at the end part of your program. So let us see. So these are how you declare a variable. We have here the data type and the name of our variable. As you can see with our naming convention, it has something to do, it's related to the use of the variable. So make sure that once you create now a variable, it should be related to what's the variable is doing to you, what the variable is doing to your program. So that's it. So float, we have some float and double, char for the character, and we initialize, so we can initialize here right after you declare the variable, or you could also separately initialize the value of each variable. So we have integer, float, Z is our double, and CH is our boolean, no, character char, and then bool for our boolean. And then we also have a string variable, which is initialized as Java programming. So let us try to output or to run the result of this program. So we will be displaying the value. The one that I did not add up is the integer, the value, the result of byte and long. So we will try to add up byte and long. So we will just add this line. So the byte, we'll just change this into byte. Byte value of our variable name is byte x. So I'll just copy the word and placed it here. And the last one that we're going to add is our long example. So you have, this is our long. All right, and we will place it also here. So the difference is, the one we enclose in a double quote is, it will display whatever it is. All right, including the spaces and the way we type it. Like, it's not capital letter at the first line of the word, and it has a space at the end. That's how it will be displayed because it's enclosed in a double quote. But outside that, this one here, it will not be displayed as byte, bytx, because it's already a variable, meaning whatever value you initialize, whatever value you put to byte byte x will be the one that will be displayed in your console. So we will also try to see if the initial value of our long, which is 3 billion 100 100,000 million and then billion, we'll see if it will create now a space in between of these three digits. All right, so let us run the program, or let us execute the program. So I will not, so let us check if it's correct. Int x is the variable that we, so if I would position my cursor to the variable, so it would also highlight the source of the variable, like the declaration, the initialization, and the display. So we have for float, we display float variable FLT, the initialization, and the declaration. Then you have z as our, this is not the correct, this is not a good naming convention. We just simply put z. We do not know what z is all about, but we have here, we display the value of z, and we initialize the value of z with 15.3445, and to create, or to distinctively identify z as a float, as a double and not a float, we put a letter d, all right, in the end part. And for s is our string, which do have an initial value of Java programming. Lastly is we have bool for a value of true or false, and ch for our character char declaration of y. So we have s. So as you can see it again, as I click s, it display now the declaration, the declaration of the variable s, the initialization of the variable s, and the displaying of the variable s. We have bool, the display, the initialization of first value of our bool is true, and the declaration of bool, which is boolean. And last one is we have ch for our char or character with an initial value of y, and you have now char as data type for the ch variable. So let us run the program. So to run the program, you have now run, and then choose the program. So that's the pdatatypes.java. As you can see, We have now the way it's displayed is still it's a straight number, but the purpose that we just simply put here is to give us for our convenience of reading the data, for our convenience of reading the value. But once you run the program, still is a straight number and not separated with comma or spaces. We will have format command to create now an output that has now a separator, a comma separator for an integer value like this one. And we have now variable x is 10. We have x, yes, and then we have 12.5 for our float, 15 for our double, and the string line Java programming for our s variable, and true for our bool, as well as y for our ch. So those are then the example of how are you going to declare a variable. So these are our variable declaration. This part here are our initialization, the first memory value of your variable declared or of the variable you declared. And this part is the displaying of output, or we display the output or the content of each of the variable declaration that you have had. So this is an example of a variable declaration, data types, and identifier lesson.